What's the moment you knew your spouse's business trips weren't actually for work? Derek had been traveling for work every other weekend for 8 months. Always the same story: client meetings in Portland, conference in Seattle, training seminar in Denver. He'd pack his leather briefcase, kiss my forehead, and promise to call when he landed. The calls always came right on schedule. Background noise of hotel lobbies, muffled conversations about quarterly reports. He'd text photos of bland conference rooms and mediocre hotel breakfast buffets. Everything seemed legitimate. I never questioned it because Derek worked in pharmaceutical sales, a job that genuinely required travel. His company had contracts across 3 states, and weekend work wasn't unusual in his industry. Plus, he always brought home the right conference swag: branded pens, polo shirts with pharmaceutical company logos, business cards from new contacts. The first red flag came when I decided to surprise him. It was our 3rd wedding anniversary, and Derek was supposedly in Portland for a 2-day client presentation. I'd planned to drive up, book a nice restaurant, maybe extend his business trip into a romantic weekend. We'd been married 3 years, but lately Derek seemed distant. Not cold exactly, just preoccupied. Always checking his phone, always mentioning how stressful work had become. I thought a surprise visit might reconnect us, reignite whatever spark we'd been missing. I called his hotel to confirm his room number so I could send flowers ahead of my arrival. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have anyone by that name registered," the desk clerk said after checking twice. My stomach dropped. Maybe he'd changed hotels last minute? Derek was particular about accommodations. He preferred certain hotel chains, specific room types. I called the 3 other hotels he'd mentioned staying at during previous Portland trips. The Marriott, the Hilton, even the boutique place downtown he'd complained about once. Nothing. No Derek Castellanos anywhere. I sat in our kitchen, staring at my phone, trying to rationalize what I'd learned. Perhaps his company booked under a different name? Maybe there was some corporate account I didn't know about? Derek worked for a large pharmaceutical company. Surely they had special arrangements with hotels. But something felt wrong, really wrong. Then I remembered his work laptop. Derek always left it at home during trips, claiming company policy required him to use secure devices provided on site. But if he was really traveling for pharmaceutical conferences, wouldn't he need his normal laptop for presentations? The man lived on that thing during regular work weeks. I opened it. No password, which should have been another red flag. Derek was meticulous about security in every other aspect of his life. His browser history was clean, too clean. Like, professionally scrubbed clean. But his email was still logged in. I scrolled through months of correspondence with his manager, clients, and colleagues. Meeting notes, sales figures, client complaints, training schedules, everything you'd expect from someone in pharmaceutical sales. Except for one thing. Every single business trip Derek had taken corresponded with days he'd called in sick to work. 8 months of weekend trips. 8 months of Portland conferences and Seattle training seminars. 8 months of lies. I printed out everything. Email timestamps, sick day requests, calendar entries. The pattern was undeniable. Derek would email his boss Friday afternoon claiming food poisoning or migraines, then text me from his hotel that same evening. My hands were shaking as I stared at the evidence spread across our dining room table. The same table where Derek had shown me brochures from his first conference, explaining how these weekend seminars would advance his career. But if he wasn't traveling for work, where was he going? And more importantly, who was he with? I started tracking his credit card statements, something I'd never done before because I trusted him completely. We had a joint account for household expenses, but Derek maintained his own cards for work travel and personal purchases. He'd always said it was easier for expense reports if business and personal spending stayed separate. Getting access required calling the credit card company and pretending to be confused about charges. As his wife, they allowed me to verify recent transactions after I provided our address and Derek's social security number. What I found made my hands shake even more violently. Gas stations along Interstate 5, but heading south toward California, not north toward Portland or Seattle. Hotel charges in Sacramento, spanning multiple weekends. Restaurant bills for 2 people at romantic establishments with names like Bella Vista and Moonlight Terrace. Wine tastings in Napa Valley, couples massage sessions at luxury spas, and most damning jewelry store purchases, expensive ones, charges from Tiffany & Co. K Jewelers, even a local boutique jeweler I'd never heard of. I'd never received jewelry from any of Derek's trips. Not once. In fact, Derek had been oddly unromantic lately. No flowers, no surprise gifts, no spontaneous date nights. I'd attributed it to work stress, but now I realized he'd been saving his romantic energy for someone else. The next morning, I called in sick to my teaching job and drove to Derek's office. I needed to verify what I'd discovered, but I couldn't march in there demanding answers. Instead, I decided to visit his coworker Brent, who I'd always gotten along well with at company parties. "Hey, stranger," Brent said when I appeared at his cubicle with coffee and donuts. "Derek's not here. Thought you'd know that. He's been taking a lot of personal days lately." "Personal days?" I asked carefully, offering him a glazed donut. "Yeah, every other weekend for months. Lucky bastard. We keep joking that he must have some sweet side hustle going on." Brent lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, some of us think he's interviewing somewhere else. Why else would someone need so many long weekends? Management's starting to notice too." I managed to smile and nod, making small talk about holiday plans and office gossip, but inside I was screaming. Derek had been telling his coworkers he was taking personal time while telling me he was working mandatory conferences. "Speaking of Derek," Brent continued, unwrapping a second donut, "he seems really happy lately. Like, genuinely happy. Whatever he's doing on these long weekends, it's working for him. He comes back Monday morning with this huge grin, talking about how recharged he feels. That detail hit me like a physical blow. Derek was happy. Because of whatever he was doing on his fake business trips, he was coming home to me refreshed and satisfied because he'd spent the weekend with someone else. Back home, I sat in Derek's home office, staring at the evidence I'd compiled, the fake hotel stays, the credit card charges for romantic dinners and jewelry, the pattern of lies spanning 8 months, but I still didn't know who he was with or why he'd constructed such an elaborate deception. That's when I decided to search more thoroughly. I went through Derek's dresser drawers, his closet, even the pockets of jackets he rarely wore. In his sock drawer, I found receipts he'd apparently forgotten about, receipts for lingerie purchases, sizes that definitely weren't mine. I wore a medium. These were all size small. Receipts for expensive perfume. Again, not brands I used. I was allergic to most fragrances, a fact Derek knew well. Then, hidden inside an old shoebox underneath some winter boots he never wore, I found the burner phone, a cheap prepaid device with dozens of text messages. The contact was saved simply as M. The messages told the entire story. M. Can't wait to see you this weekend. I've missed you so much it physically hurts. Derek. Same here, baby. Told Claire I have a conference in Portland again. M. How much longer do we have to do this? I hate sneaking around. I hate that you have to lie to her. Derek. Soon, sweetheart. Just need to figure out the right timing. These things can't be rushed. I scrolled back through months of conversations. Pet names that made my stomach turn, plans for romantic getaways to places I'd always wanted to visit, photos I definitely wasn't meant to see, Derek's face in intimate moments with a woman I didn't recognize. But the messages that made my blood run cold were the recent ones. Derek, talk to the lawyer today. If I file first and claim irreconcilable differences, I can protect my assets. Claire won't see it coming. M. Are you sure? I don't want to be the reason your marriage ends. I can wait longer if needed. Derek. My marriage ended the day I met you. Claire just doesn't know it yet. She's been living in a fantasy for months. M. What did the lawyer say about the house? Derek. If I can prove I've been the primary breadwinner and she's just a teacher with a small salary, I should be able to keep most of our assets. Especially if I can show she's been financially irresponsible. M. Has she been financially irresponsible? Derek. She will be, once I make a few strategic moves. Trust me, I've got this figured out. I screenshotted everything, my hands trembling with rage and disbelief. Derek wasn't just cheating, he was systematically planning to destroy my financial future. The fake business trips weren't just about hiding an affair. They were about creating a paper trail to support claims that he was a dedicated traveling employee who deserved to keep the assets we'd built together. I thought about all the times Derek had discouraged me from pursuing a master's degree that would increase my teaching salary, how he'd suggested I didn't need a separate savings account since we were partners in everything, how he'd insisted on putting most of our major purchases in his name only, claiming it was easier for tax purposes. I'd been played. Systematically, deliberately played by the man I'd trusted with everything, but Derek had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. I spent the next week taking personal days of my own, consulting with a lawyer Derek had never met, in a different city. Patricia Henley specialized in divorce cases involving hidden assets and financial fraud. Her office was discreet, professional, and exactly what I needed. You need to document everything, Patricia advised, reviewing the evidence I'd brought. Bank records, credit card statements, phone records, employment records. And whatever you do, don't let him know you've discovered his plan. Men like your husband rely on the element of surprise. Patricia explained how Derek's strategy would likely unfold. He'd file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, claim I was financially dependent and unstable, then use his alleged business travel as proof that he deserved to keep the house and major assets. Meanwhile, he'd hide money in accounts I didn't know about, possibly even claiming his affair-related expenses as legitimate business costs. The good news, Patricia continued, is that he's created a detailed digital trail of his deception. Those text messages alone will destroy any credibility he might have had in court, but we need to move fast and smart. So I did exactly that. I opened a private bank account at a different institution and began transferring money from our joint savings, money I was legally entitled to as his spouse. I hired a private investigator to follow Derek during his next business trip and document his actual activities. I collected 8 months of credit card statements, photographed documents from his home office, and copied every file from his laptop. Most importantly, I started keeping a detailed journal of Derek's behavior, documenting his lies, his late nights working, and the gradual changes in his personality over the past year. But the key to my strategy was that Derek remained completely oblivious. The following Friday, Derek packed his briefcase for another Seattle training seminar. He was in an especially good mood, humming while he folded clothes and even bringing me coffee in bed. "Will you miss me?" he asked, kissing my cheek with what I now recognized as guilt-motivated affection. "Always," I lied, smiling back at him. "You're the best, Claire. I don't know what I'd do without you." The irony was suffocating, but I maintained my performance. "Drive safely. Call me when you get there." Once his car disappeared down our street, I got to work implementing the plan Patricia and I had developed. First, I met with the private investigator, Vincent Torres, who would follow Derek to Sacramento and document his activities. Vincent was a former police detective who specialized in infidelity cases. He promised comprehensive photo and video evidence of whatever Derek was really doing on his business trips. Next, I visited our bank and transferred exactly half of our joint savings to my new private account, an amount I was legally entitled to, but Derek wouldn't notice until he received his monthly statement. I also removed my name from several shared credit cards Derek had been using to fund his affair. Then I drove to Derek's office for what would be my final surprise visit. This time, I met with Derek's manager, Thomas Walsh, under the pretense of planning a surprise party for Derek's upcoming birthday. I brought homemade cookies and asked about Derek's recent travel schedule, claiming I wanted to ensure the party didn't conflict with any important work trips. Travel schedule? Thomas looked confused. Derek hasn't traveled for work in over a year. We shifted most of our client meetings to virtual calls after the pandemic. Much more cost-effective. Oh, I said, feigning surprise. He's been going to so many conferences lately? I thought they were work-related. Thomas's expression changed. What kind of conferences? I pulled out my phone and showed him photos Derek had sent me from his alleged work trips. Pictures of generic conference rooms and hotel lobbies. Thomas examined them carefully. These don't look familiar. And Derek definitely hasn't been approved for any conference attendance. In fact, he's been using quite a few sick days recently. I documented everything Thomas told me, with his permission. Derek's employment records would be crucial evidence in the divorce proceedings. That evening, I received the first report from Vincent. Derek had indeed driven to Sacramento, but instead of checking into a business hotel, he'd gone directly to an upscale residential neighborhood. The woman who answered the door was young, beautiful, and very pregnant. Very, very pregnant. Vincent's photos showed Derek embracing her, his hands protectively cradling her obviously round belly. They looked like an expectant couple posing for maternity photos. I stared at the images on my laptop screen, feeling like I might vomit. Derek wasn't just having an affair, he was having a baby with someone else, while married to me, while planning to divorce me and steal our assets. The woman's name was Melissa Chen, according to Vincent's research. She was 28 years old, worked as a marketing coordinator for a tech company, and lived in a condo Derek had been helping pay for. Based on her appearance in the photos, she was about 6 months pregnant, which meant Derek had gotten her pregnant right around the time his business trips started. I called Patricia immediately. "This changes everything," she said after I emailed her Vincent's photos. "Pregnancy complicates the timeline significantly. We need to file divorce papers immediately before that baby is born. Otherwise, Derek might try to claim paternal rights affect his financial obligations to you." We scheduled an emergency meeting for the next morning. Meanwhile, I had to get through the weekend pretending everything was normal, waiting for Derek to return from his romantic getaway with his pregnant girlfriend. Saturday and Sunday were the longest days of my life. Derek sent his usual text messages from Seattle, photos of boring seminar rooms and complaints about hotel coffee. Each message felt like a knife twist, knowing he was actually playing house with Melissa, probably discussing nursery colors and baby names. Sunday evening, Derek returned home full of stories about his training seminar, how informative the sessions had been, how he'd learned new strategies for pharmaceutical sales, how much he'd missed me and our comfortable life together. "How was your weekend, babe?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I stood at the kitchen sink, trying not to flinch at his touch. "Productive," I said. "I learned a lot." Derek nuzzled my neck. "Learn anything interesting?" "Oh yes," I replied. "Very interesting." Monday morning, Derek left for his real job, whistling and checking his phone constantly, probably texting Melissa about their wonderful weekend together. I drove straight to the courthouse and filed for divorce, citing adultery, fraud, and emotional distress. I also filed emergency motions preventing Derek from accessing our joint accounts, selling any major assets, or making any significant financial decisions without court approval. Patricia had prepared a comprehensive filing that included Derek's text messages, the credit card evidence, his employment records showing the fake business trips, and Vincent's photos of Derek with his pregnant girlfriend. By 11:30 a.m., Derek's lawyer had called him at work. He arrived home early, his face pale and confused, holding a thick envelope of legal documents. "What the hell is this about?" he demanded, his usual calm demeanor completely shattered. I was waiting in our living room, having spent the morning packing his belongings into boxes. I placed a thick folder on our coffee table and slid it toward him. "Your business trips," I said calmly. Derek opened the folder with trembling hands. His face went through a rapid progression of emotions as he saw the evidence: confusion, recognition, panic, and finally something approaching resignation. The credit card statements showing romantic dinners for two, screenshots of his text messages with M, Vincent's photos of him with pregnant Melissa, his employment records proving he'd been lying about work travel. Everything. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly, sinking into the chair across from me. "Since our anniversary, when I tried to surprise you in Portland." I kept my voice steady and factual. "The hotel said you weren't registered." That's when I started paying attention to details I'd been ignoring. Derek looked through more of the evidence. The jewelry store receipts, the spa charges, the photos of him cradling Melissa's pregnant belly. "Her name is Melissa," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "I met her at a conference in January. A real conference." "I don't care what her name is," I interrupted. "I care that you've been living a double life for 8 months while planning to financially destroy me." Derek's eyes widened as he reached the printed text messages discussing his legal strategy. I was just protecting myself by hiding assets and creating false documentation about work expenses." I pulled out additional papers. "Did you know that falsifying business travel for personal use is considered fraud? Your company's HR department found that very interesting when I provided them with your real credit card statements and Vincent's surveillance photos." Derek's face went completely white. "You contacted my work? You hired a private investigator?" "I contacted everyone who needed to know the truth. Your boss, HR." our insurance company, because they've been inadvertently covering your fake business travel claims, and of course, my lawyer. I gestured to the legal documents he was still holding. Patricia Henley specializes in cases exactly like this. This is insane, Derek said, standing up abruptly. You're destroying my career, my reputation, everything we've built together, over a relationship that doesn't even mean anything. I laughed, actually laughed, a sound that surprised both of us. It meant enough for you to get her pregnant. It meant enough for you to plan an elaborate divorce strategy around hiding your assets. It meant enough for you to spend 8 months systematically lying to my face while I made your dinners and did your laundry. Derek tried a different approach. He sat back down, reaching for my hands, his voice taking on the pleading tone I'd heard him use with difficult clients. Claire, please. I know I made mistakes, huge mistakes, but we can work through this. I'll end things with Melissa. I'll go to counseling. I'll do whatever it takes to save our marriage. What about the baby? I asked. Derek's face crumpled. That's complicated. No, it's really not. You're going to be a father with another woman. You've been planning this for months. The only complication is that you got caught before you could execute your plan to leave me financially devastated. I showed him more documents Patricia had prepared, financial analyses showing how Derek's proposed divorce strategy would have left me with virtually nothing while he kept the house, most of our savings, and avoided paying significant alimony due to my low teaching salary. You were going to claim I was financially irresponsible while you spent our money on another woman's pregnancy, I continued. You were going to use your fake business travel as evidence that you deserved to keep our assets. You had it all figured out. Derek stared at the papers, probably realizing for the first time how thoroughly his plan had been exposed. What do you want? He asked finally. I want exactly what I'm legally entitled to, plus compensation for the money you stole from our joint accounts to fund your affair, plus punitive damages for fraud and emotional distress. The divorce proceedings took 8 months to finalize. Derek lost his job after the company conducted a full investigation into his falsified expense reports and discovered he'd been claiming personal travel as business expenses for tax purposes. The IRS became involved when they learned Derek had been deducting his affair-related trips as business costs. Melissa stopped returning Derek's calls once his employment situation became public, and the legal bills started mounting. Apparently, unemployed men facing fraud charges are less attractive than successful pharmaceutical executives, even when there's a baby involved. Derek had to sell his car, his boat, and several valuable pieces of art we'd collected together just to pay legal fees. The court ordered him to repay $23,000 in misappropriated funds, plus my legal costs, plus ongoing child support to Melissa once their baby was born. He was also required to continue paying the mortgage on our house until I decided whether to sell it or buy him out, a decision the court said I could take up to 2 years to make given the circumstances. I chose to buy him out immediately. With my teaching salary, the settlement money, and a promotion to department head that came through during the divorce proceedings, I could afford the payments. Plus, I'd grown to love the house during our marriage. Just because Derek had turned it into a crime scene didn't mean I should lose my home too. The final hearing was on a Thursday morning in October. Derek sat across the courtroom with his third lawyer. He'd burned through 2 others when he couldn't pay their fees, looking defeated and much older than his 34 years. When the judge finalized our divorce and the financial arrangements, Derek glanced over at me one last time. I think he expected to see anger or hurt or even pity. Instead, I smiled at him, a genuine, happy smile, because I was free. That evening, I found a bottle of champagne Derek had brought home from his last real business trip 2 years ago, before Melissa existed. I opened it and toasted myself in my empty kitchen, empty because Derek had taken his belongings and left me with the furniture I'd chosen and loved. To business trips, I said aloud, and learning the truth. 3 months later, my coworker mentioned seeing Derek at a local grocery store. He was working as a cashier at a discount chain, living in a studio apartment in the worst part of town. Melissa had moved back to her parents' house in Oregon with their baby, a daughter Derek had no money to visit regularly. His pharmaceutical career was over. Fraud allegations follow you in that industry, and Derek's former colleagues had made sure word spread quickly through their professional networks. I felt a brief moment of pity, then remembered the text messages where he'd called me financially irresponsible while planning to destroy my future. Some people call it revenge. I call it consequences. My lawyer, Patricia, became a genuine friend. She helped me understand that Derek's pattern of deception and manipulation probably went back years, in ways I'd never discovered. The elaborate fake business trips were just the most recent and boldest of his lies. Men like Derek don't start with grand schemes, she explained over coffee 6 months after my divorce was finalized. They start small, little white lies, minor manipulations, and build up confidence over time. Who knows what else he was hiding throughout your marriage? I didn't want to know anymore. I was finally free, financially secure, and ready to rebuild my life surrounded by people who told the truth. I started dating again after a year. Nothing serious, just coffee dates and casual dinners with men who didn't require FBI-level background checks to trust. It felt strange at first, trusting my instincts about people again. But Patricia had connected me with a therapist who specialized in helping people recover from manipulative relationships. Dr. Rachel Morrison helped me understand that Derek's behavior wasn't my fault, that there were no signs I should have caught earlier, and that trusting people isn't a character flaw, it's a strength that Derek had exploited. Healthy people don't typically assume their spouses are living double lives, Dr. Morrison explained. Your trust was normal. His deception was the aberration. Last spring, I got an unexpected text message from Derek. It arrived on what would have been our 4th wedding anniversary. I'm sorry for everything, it read. I know you'll never forgive me, but I want you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. I was a different person back then, selfish and stupid. I hope you're happy. I stared at the message for a long time, then showed it to Patricia over lunch. What do you think? I asked. I think he's broke, alone, and finally understanding what he lost, she said. But that doesn't make him a different person. It just makes him a person experiencing consequences. I deleted the message without responding. Some apologies come too late. Some trust, once shattered, can never be rebuilt. And some people only express remorse when they're suffering the results of their own choices. 2 years after our divorce, I met someone new. Not through dating apps or setups, but naturally, he was the parent of one of my students, a single father whose daughter struggled with math. We started with tutoring sessions in my classroom after school, which turned into conversations about teaching and parenting, which eventually became coffee dates and Saturday morning farmers market visits. His name is Ben, and he's everything Derek wasn't: transparent about his schedule, honest about his past, open about his finances, and genuinely interested in building something real together. When Ben travels for his job as a software consultant, he sends me his hotel confirmations without being asked. He calls from his actual room, video chat so I can see where he is, and brings home receipts and business cards that match his supposed activities. Is this weird? He asked after our 3rd month of dating, when I mentioned how much I appreciated his openness about travel. I told him about Derek, the fake business trips, the pregnant girlfriend, the elaborate financial manipulation. Ben listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and never once suggested I was overreacting or being paranoid. That's not weird, he said when I finished the story. That's normal. Trust has to be rebuilt, especially after someone destroyed it so completely. We've been together for 8 months now. Ben's daughter Sophia is a bright, funny kid who calls me Miss Claire and helps me grade papers in exchange for hot chocolate and terrible math jokes. We spend weekends doing normal couple things: hiking, cooking, visiting museums, attending Sophia's soccer games. Last month, Ben had to travel to Austin for a week-long client project. He sent daily photos of his hotel room, the conference center, his meals, even the boring presentation slides he was reviewing. Not because I asked him to, but because he understood that transparency wasn't just about proving innocence. It was about building security. On his last night in Austin, Ben called me from his hotel room for our usual goodnight conversation. I miss you, he said, his laptop open behind him showing work documents. I miss you too, I replied, and meant it completely. Claire, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever think about Derek? About what he's doing now? I considered the question carefully. Not really. Sometimes I wonder if he learned anything from losing everything. But mostly I just feel grateful that I discovered the truth when I did. I'm grateful too, Ben said. If Derek had been honest, you might never have been available when I needed a math tutor for Sophia. We laughed, but there was truth in his joke. Derek's betrayal had led me to rebuild my life more carefully, more intentional. I'd learned to trust my instincts, value my independence, and recognize genuine respect when I saw it. Do you think you'll ever get married again? Ben asked. Maybe, I said. With the right person. Someone who doesn't need to lie about where he's going or who he's with. Someone whose business trips are actually for business. Exactly. This morning, I woke up in my beautiful house, the one Derek tried to take from me, next to a man who answers his phone when I call, responds to texts promptly, and has never once made me question whether he's telling the truth about his whereabouts. I kept our house with its renovated kitchen where I'd once planned surprise anniversary trips and discovered devastating lies, but now it's filled with different energy, honest energy. Ben's coffee mug sits beside mine on the counter. Sophia's homework is spread across the dining room table. Photos from our recent camping trip are stuck to the refrigerator with magnets Ben brought back from his actual business trip to Denver. And I sleep soundly every night, knowing that everyone in my life is exactly where they claim to be. Sometimes I drive past the grocery store where Derek works, not out of malice, but because it's on my way to Sophia's school. I've never stopped in or tried to talk to him, but I've seen him through the windows. Older, thinner, wearing the red vest of a store employee instead of the expensive suits he used to prefer. I don't feel sorry for him anymore. I don't feel angry either. Mostly, I feel thankful that his deception led me to a more authentic life with people who understand that love doesn't require lies, that trust isn't naive, and that some business trips really are just business trips.